r/AskReddit. Posted by u/HalfOfABraincell. What is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained? Early into my now wife and I's relationship, I had a dream about her in childbirth. Very vivid, and long. Like I spent days in the hospital with her and everything was in a strange twilight. When it came time to deliver, things went very wrong and she and baby ended up passing away. I woke up quite shook naturally but brushed it off. I am a nurse and have had to deal with traumatic OB situations before, and I chalked it up to me dealing with that stress through a dream. 6 years later and my wife is pregnant. I have forgotten the dream by now. I get a call late into the 3rd trimester while I am on shift. Wife is going to the ER for a bad BP. I get off my shift and go to meet her. As soon as I step into the room I remember my dream. It's the same damn room. Which is extra spooky because the hospital we were at wasn't even built when I had the dream. This is last year, right when lockdown started. My wife has admitted they wanted to wait a week to deliver if possible. She will be kept in a twilight state until that time. So it's me in this room, eerily isolated as the world around us is frozen and my wife is incoherent mere feet away. Lingering for days in this room, I brushed off my dream, trying to manage my anxiety and stress. Come showtime, my wife gets ready to begin pushing and it's exactly the same scenario as my dream. Things start going poorly, but the doctor thinks delivery is still possible. But at this point I finally freak out into full panic, and demand a C-section for my wife. The doctor, I can tell, wants to argue, but I think my outburst made her step back and reassess the situation and she made the call for emergency C-section. Took 10 minutes for me to get taken back and as I'm in the OR I see my baby come out lifeless. They do everything they can and manage to resuscitate her. In the meantime my wife is doing poorly and they are scrambling to control her bleeding. I follow the baby out knowing there's really nothing I can do. Baby gets life flighted to another hospital, but before we go I see my wife stable and headed to the ICU. Both my wife and baby are critical but alive. Today they are both thriving and my baby is 16 months and just a tornado of energy. I don't know that they would be alive if not for that dream and it causing me to freak out and demand a change in plan. Many years ago, my parents had separated and my father was planning on taking a trip across the country to California. He was pretty excited about it. I talked to him the day before he's leaving, wish him well and tell him I'll talk to him after he gets to California. The day of his trip, he calls me and tells me he decided last minute not to go. Refuses to really get into why. Just says he changed his mind. Seemed really odd for something that he had been planning for a couple months. That night I'm sitting at my girlfriend's house and we're watching the news, and they report that US Air Flight 1493, the flight my dad was supposed to be on, collided with another aircraft while landing in Los Angeles. About 25% of the people on the flight were killed. Hard to know how my dad would have made out, because it really depended on where you were sitting, front versus back of the plane. It was several months before he finally told me that night before he was supposed to leave, he had an extremely vivid dream that he died in a fiery plane crash. So vivid that it scared him out of flying that day. My dad is a Marine Corps Vietnam veteran who saw combat. I can only imagine how vivid the dream must have been, to scare him out of getting on that plane that morning. Super minor compared to many in this thread. Night before Thanksgiving 3 years ago I was across the country at my parents', driving back to theirs with my now wife from a friend's house. As we draw near, there is some type of bundle in the middle of the road. I stopped and pulled off to move it, and it turned out to be a barred owl that got clipped by a car. Long story short, I spent the rest of that night getting the owl into a puppy cage, gave it some food and water, and the next day dropped it off at a wildlife rescue center. I got home the next week, all the way across the country, New Jersey to Oregon. I stepped outside and there was a barred owl sitting on my fence watching me. It was gone by the time I got back. But now I know I'm straight with all owls. I have an idea of what may have happened, but I cannot definitively say how this happened. My father died in 2000 in my parents' house. I was over one night pretty late after my mother had gone to sleep. I swear I could feel my father's presence, as I was right in the spot where he had died. They believe he had a heart attack while laying on the couch, tried to get off the couch to call for help but fell on the floor and died, though no one else was home when it happened. I was on the couch when this happened. Anyway, I thought to myself, this is stupid. People don't leave essences behind, I'm not feeling anything. So, I say out loud, if this is really you, Dad, knock a box of cereal off the shelf onto the floor. I wanted to pick something I didn't think could happen by accident. I went into the kitchen and watched the shelf with the cereal on it for a few minutes and nothing happened. Since it was almost midnight, I decided to sleep in my old bedroom. I woke up the next morning and went downstairs and a box of cereal was laying on the floor. I say to my mother, "Did you knock that cereal onto the floor?" She said no, it was like that when she woke up. So, what the fuck, man? However, my mother had a cat. I'm guessing the cat did it, but I don't know for sure. If she'd gotten on the shelf, everything would have been knocked around and messy from her. Everything else was in its normal position, just the box of cereal was on the floor. I mean, regardless, it has to have been the cat, right? When I was a kid, about 10-12ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair, so naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backwards while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking "Help, guess I'm about to die" while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet when I felt two hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing, but no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell, like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned lights on for him, no other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point I logged it as an incident, and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. Next day my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days, and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened. I had a dream once about my high school best friend who had moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in at least 10 years and had never met her child, except seeing pictures/posts on Facebook and commenting on them. In my dream I was walking down a street at night and out of nowhere her little girl appears next to me and I asked her, "Where is your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house on the street and finding my friend in bad shape, beaten up or something, on the ground, and I remember running to the door of the random house screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from the dream, but I think there may have been a little more. The next day, I wake up and think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt of her because we had just spoken a little in comments of a Facebook post. I should send her a message. I go on about my day, go to work, get home later that day and sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook. Bam! 1,000 posts, rest in peace, etc., all of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought, what in the actual FCK? At that point there was no information as to what had happened, so I thought it must have been a car accident or something. Over the course of the next few weeks to months, more and more information came out and it was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. I won't refer to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of the dream vividly. I still am a little horrified that I had this dream that night. When it was happening, possibly. I haven't been able to tell anyone else about it either because just thinking about it gives me chills. My son, now 10, was 4 and was able to name my grandmother, by name, by a picture of her when she was in her 20s that was in storage that my mom and I were going through. She died before my wife and I even met. He said she was the lady who taught him how to do his silly laugh. Context: his silly laugh, as we called it, was a laugh that sounded just like my grandmother's. The reason it was so specific and silly was that my grandmother had a brain aneurysm when my mom was in her teens. It paralyzed the left of her body, including vocal cords and lips, and gave her a very distinct and odd-sounding laugh. When I was going to my family's home I got in a SUV going down the road. This was in Bangladesh at the time, and after taking the SUV, the next 2 hours would be a highway going down a forest. I was sitting shotgun, and along the highway there was an old man walking down the highway. He was hitchhiking and the driver decided to pick him up. He insisted on sitting in my seat and obliged as he was an older man. About an hour down the drive, our car collided with a bus and the shotgun seat was mangled up. We all got out and we looked around, but we couldn't find the old man that insisted on taking my seat anywhere. Stories like these aren't rare, but I didn't believe them. We all know the man sat in my seat and we all saw him. But he was nowhere to be found. Edit, he just vanished. No blood. He was wearing ethnic attire which isn't peculiar around that area. He didn't speak at all, and we didn't ask him anything either. He just said to drop him off at the market ahead, which would be in the town my house was in. One thing that was weird was that he spoke in an oldish Bengali. Like a old Bengali that we'd see in poetry from the 1800s. I didn't see it as peculiar cause he seemed like an ascetic. Second edit, I have pics of the collision if you guys were wondering. Third edit, when I said he didn't speak at all, I meant during the ride. He didn't say anything other than where he wanted to go and insisting on my seat. My granddad died when I was 7, but, per his own words, I was his absolute favorite, partially because I am the splitting image of his mother, even into adulthood. When I was 21, I was set to give birth to my first son. I was about to get into the elevator to L&D when a man came in saying that he a volunteer and he'd help me and my husband find our way. The elevator was slow, but we spent the time talking about what a blessing children are and how they grow up so fast. Here's the thing, he looked and sounded exactly like my granddad, same stature, same blue-gray eyes, same faint Scottish-Canadian accent, same khakis, check shirt, and sky blue cardigan. Even spookier is that the nurses said they don't have any older male volunteers in that particular building. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I am absolutely certain Granddad paid me a visit that night. Apparently we lived with a benign spirit in our house for 3.5 years. This is my mother's account of what happened because my sister and I didn't see anything at the time. Only my brother, his best friend, and my mother saw it. Back when we were living in South Africa, we had moved into an apartment which we had bought. The moving in was actually quite eventful because a mother and her son were renting the place before, and although they had been notified, they decided to stay past the date that was given to them. I'm not really sure about the details to that as I was around 7 or 8. Long story short, we moved in and started settling. After putting us to bed, my mother decided to stay up and watch TV. My brother was out with his friends. As she's watching whatever show was on at the time, she glances to our only plant in the house, which is about 1.5 meters tall, and sees a man roughly the same height as the plant standing under one of its leaves. Noping out of that shit, she gets up and flicks the lights on. He's not there. Calling it a night, she goes to bed. The next day, or maybe 2 days later, I'm not sure on that detail, at breakfast my brother, who was around 16 at the time, picked up a piece of bread, turned around to the plant and said, "Hey Michael. Want some?" Laughing. My mother asks him who Michael is and he says Michael's the guy standing under the plant at night. Mind you, my mother didn't say anything to anyone about Michael to not freak us out. My brother's best friend was also over that morning. We had basically unofficially adopted him, and my mother asks him if he sees Michael too and he says yes. She then asks him to describe Michael and he gives a perfect description down to the whites of his eyes. Michael apparently was a black young man around 1/40 of a meter in height, wearing plain black trousers, a white button-down shirt, and a green vest. His skin tone was quite dark with a faint sheen to it. His eyes were also dark in velour and the whites were tinted a bit yellow. He had a permanent smiling expression on his face that didn't reach his eyes. He stayed put where he was, never moving but following you with his eyes. One morning my mom woke up to my dad coming home, who had bought this indoor circulating water thing. I really don't know what they're called. He moved the plant exactly opposite where it was, next to the couch, and put that water thing there instead. My mother didn't say anything, and that night Michael also moved with the plant. Of course, after hearing this, I asked the next logical question that any sane person would ask. Why the fuck didn't she just throw away the plant? She said it never occurred to her facepalm. So yeah, that is the story of Michael, the benign smiling spirit that was a part of our family for some time.